In my last Marvel vs. Capcom video, the one where I went over my general wishes for a new game, I said I'd do a follow-up focused on characters if I could manage to get 5,000 views or 50 subscribers within its first 2 weeks. Well, within just 4 days, it met that view goal and tripled the subscriber goal. So thank you everybody who's come along for the ride off that video. I hope you're enjoying my backlog and are looking forward to future uploads too. But enough of that now. I've got a promise to make good on. So let's do this thing. As you may recall from my previous MvC video, I put forward the idea that an ideal roster would evenly balance 8 character type categories amidst the 2 universes. For Marvel, Famous Faces, Cosmic Picks, X-Men, and Wildcards. And for Capcom, Famous Faces, Contemporary Characters, Stars of Yesteryear, and literally Who's. I also suggested that I had a roster mock-up ready to go, as well as 2 top 10 most wanted character lists from Marvel and Capcom respectively. And while this was technically true, when I actually sat down to make this video, some things changed along the way. For the better, don't worry. Here's the deal. What I'm gonna do for this video is craft a somewhat feasible roster that isn't necessarily what I believe would happen if Marvel vs. Capcom 4 gets made, but works within restrictions that take some level of expectation into account, alongside naturally keeping those aforementioned 8 categories evenly balanced. Once that base roster is done, I'll propose 3 DLC passes for it. One that's all newcomers, one that's all veterans, and one that includes my own personal most wanted newcomers. Now, first things first. How many newcomers will be in this roster? And will they reflect my top 10 most wanted? Well, no, as I just said, I've opted to save my very most wanted newcomers for that DLC pass. Let's not get too ahead of ourselves. Still, even though these newcomers won't reflect my personal top 10, they will still number 10 in total, 5 from Marvel, 5 from Capcom. Well, actually 12 in total, with 6 from both companies, if you count clone characters. But that's not first things first, that's second things second. Namely, how big will this roster be? And what do you mean clone characters? Well, looking at the roster sizes of Capcom's latest fighting games, plus the sizes of previous MvC games, I've opted to make this base roster 36 characters in total. The same size as Infinite post DLC, 2 characters shy of Marvel vs. Capcom 3's base roster, 6 if you don't count clone characters, and twice the amount as Capcom's last fighting game release, Street Fighter 6's base roster. It may not be 100% realistic to expect that many characters in the base game, so it's a good thing that I'm not really. This is just a video, remember? None of this is solid speculation on my part. I just think 36 is a comfy number because it lets us use 4 characters per the 8 categories we're building off of, plus 4 extra clone characters, just to pad the lineup out by a horsehair. Heck, might as well tell you who those clone characters are while we're on the subject, eh? The clone characters in this base roster are Ken Masters, War Machine, newcomer Spider-Gwen, and newcomer Marionette from Darkstalkers. Ken, Gwen, and Rhodey will play extremely similarly to Ryu, Spider-Man, and Iron Man, with some differences here and there where you'd expect them. Marionette, on the other hand, is a bit special. In the Vampire Survivor games, players could input a special code on the character select to play as Marionette, who essentially enables mirror matches through the arcade mode run with a special entrance animation where she possesses the body of your fighter and a creepypasta tier victory screen comes up at the end. This Marvel vs. Capcom game will utilize Marionette in much the same way. Selecting her on the character select screen will choose one of your opponent's fighters at random for you to play as, but with unique entrance, defeat, and victory animations. Hey, that was a lot of talking for just one clone character. Let's move on. I'll cover these first 2 categories together as they boil down to much the same reasoning. Marvel's Famous Faces and Capcom's Famous Faces. I've chosen Spider-Man, Ryu, Iron Man, Chun-Li, Hulk, Mega Man, Captain America, and Dante, respectively. Each of them's an all-star. It'd be unthinkable to leave any of them out. Plus, you already knew 3 of them were coming because I name-dropped them in the clone section. Onward now to the second Marvel category, Cosmic Picks. Now let me quickly define for you what I consider to be a cosmic pick. I'm not talking specifically about characters categorized in Marvel fandom as cosmic, but characters on the whole who are expressly otherworldly. This includes not just characters from or whose powers come from outer space, but also characters aligned with sorcery, ultra-dimensional mumbo-jumbo, stuff like that. My 4 picks for this category are Thor, Venom, the Goat Shumagorath, and newcomer Scarlet Witch. Here you see the first and far from last begrudging pick on my end. Full disclosure, I've never been a big fan of the Scarlet Witch, in any iteration really. Not the MCU, not Wolverine and the X-Men, not House of M, not Avengers Disassembled. I've always found Wanda Maximoff to be uncompelling at best and annoying at worst. But when it came to choosing a newcomer cosmic pick for this base roster, who wouldn't fit more neatly in my own personal most wanted list, Wanda made the most sense. In all transparency, I also considered Agatha Harkness, the Enchantress, and Athena from the Eternals. But yeah, Scarlet Witch made the cut. Let's switch over to Capcom now and cover the contemporary category. This category generally covers characters who hail from or originate from Capcom series or games that are still going strong as of the present day. And let me tell ya, narrowing down the possible choices for both veteran fighters and potential newcomers in this category was really tough. But the characters I've ultimately chosen are Monster Hunter, Frank West, newcomer Jury from Street Fighter IV, and newcomer Lady Dimitrescu from Resident Evil 8. While I personally believe the Monster Hunter franchise would be better represented with a playable monster rather than the characterizing a generic hunter route Infinite took, again, I'm saving some juicier picks for my personal wish list and don't want to leave the base roster totally lacking in Monster Hunter representation. And Frank West? Some of you might be asking? Between him and someone like Phoenix Wright, you choose Frank West? Well hey, if you are thinking that, just hold your tongue before you make a fool of yourself in the comments. Remember that we have some DLC lists to get to later on here. Lady Dimitrescu being the, spoiler alert, sole Resident Evil character in the base roster might strike you as a radical decision, but A, remember my Phoenix Wright comment, just hold your horses. And B, similarly to my thoughts on Monster Hunter, I feel the Resident Evil series being a survival horror at its core would be best represented by a foe on the roster rather than a hero. And Lady Dimitrescu was unquestionably the breakout star of Resident Evil 8, a major sensation for Capcom. And Jury was chosen over a newcomer from another series like Nero from DMC or something, because I feel Street Fighter is entitled to representation beyond Ryu and Chun-Li. And Ken, I guess. We need to fill out the 5 Capcom newcomers from somewhere, and Jury being a popular character and a villain edged her out over other choices I could have gone with. And before you sickos start accusing me of ulterior motives, I would give her Swedish clog dancing shoes if I could, okay? Don't go assuming things about me just because I'm a sock. That's racist. Flipping back over to Marvel, let's visit the next to last category, X-Men. And by X-Men, I of course don't mean purely members of the X-Men team, just characters inextricably linked to the general X-Men mythos. The characters I chose are Wolverine, Deadpool, Storm, and newcomer, Kitty Pryde. This was a difficult selection to make, but again, bear in mind we've still got 3 DLC picks to go over later. Still, the choices made here feel generally right to me. I wanted to include a newcomer X-Man here, and ideally one who gave off a similar vibe to other off-color picks from MVC's past, like Spiral, Marrow, and Omega Red. Kitty may be a bit vanilla by those metrics, with her power to phase through objects being her only real mutant ability, but it's the incorporation of her dragon partner Lockheed that put her over the edge for me. Back to Capcom. In the Arcade Stars of Yesteryear category, I've chosen Morrigan, Captain Commando, Strider Hiryu, and newcomer Edward Falcon from Power Stone. I think we can all agree and get behind the 3 veterans chosen here, right? And as for Edward, hey, Power Stone is long overdue for some recognition from the Versus series, and Falcon's the poster boy for it. It just makes sense for the first time round. The last 4 characters in the base roster from Marvel, the wildcards as I call them, are characters who either don't fit the previous 3 categories, or if they do, you wouldn't know it because they're just too damn weird or obscure. Out of all the categories I whittled down for this roster, this was the most difficult, hands down. I freaking love weird, obscure characters, especially from the pages of Marvel Comics. But I digress. The 4 I ended up choosing are She-Hulk, newcomer The Wasp, newcomer Elsa Bloodstone, and newcomer, drumroll please, Beverly Switzler. I chose She-Hulk for the base roster purely to make good on her threat to Deadpool in Marvel vs. Capcom 3.
If there's ever an MvC4, I'll destroy you there too, Wade.
But also because I didn't want all 4 wildcard spots to go to newcomers, and I'm saving my favorite veteran weirdo for later. The Wasp is one of my very favorite Marvel characters and a dramatically underappreciated character in the grand scheme of the Avengers mythos. I think it'd be jolly good fun to play as her, shrinking and growing in size as she zips around pulling off moves and maybe even summoning her husband Hank for a couple supers here and there. Can't you just imagine Giant Man's foot coming down over the arena like that one move Anacharus from Darkstalkers has? So much fun. Elsa Bloodstone feels like a good pick for a fighting game. I'll admit I also considered Blade and Morbius to take on her spooky vibe, but I ultimately chose Elsa because I think she looked the coolest drawn in the Bengus art style, sue me. And finally, for those of you who don't know, Beverly Switzler is the human love interest / partner in crime of Howard the Duck. Marvel had considered Howard for a playable appearance as far back as Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter, but Marvel had wanted at the time to distance themselves from Howard after the George Lucas movie flopped so hard. And with Rocket Raccoon claiming the foul-mouthed, violence-prone bipedal animal card all to himself MvC3 and onward, it hasn't seemed likely Howard would ever get his shot. And Lord knows Marvel themselves can't figure out what to do with him in a fighting game. Hell, Contest of Champions just threw their fed-up hands in the air and made him Tronbon. That's why I, my friends, am proposing that Howard the Duck not actually join the roster proper, but cheer on the sidelines as his barely more capable girlfriend throws the fisticuffs. That alone is funny enough for me to view her as the ultimate comedy wildcard character. But then I got to thinking, hey, isn't she a veterinarian now? Couldn't that be used to justify her summoning other odd Marvel animal characters like Hell Cow, Throg, and even Devil Dinosaur for specials and supers? When you look at her that way, she's not just a wildcard, she's a full wild deck, baby! And now, let's finally close off the base roster with the last remaining Capcom reps. The Literally Who's. Returning from MvC2 for the first time are the Versus Series original characters Ruby Hart and Domingo. And along with them are newcomers Miria from Breath of Fire and Devilot from Cyberbots. Hey, quick edit addendum that I'm actually choosing to do right now off the cuff during editing. Like post making the graphics and recording the audio and filming and everything. It really just isn't sitting right with me that the two newcomer Literally Who's I chose are both evil little blonde girls. I'm a big enough Cyberbots fan to pick another deep cut there, I tell myself. It's like everyone goes for Devilot. So I'm choosing instead to go with Santana Lawrence, the pilot of my main from Cyberbots actually, Reptos. He's a mercenary, he's a scrounger, he's a big cool dude who can, he'd be cool. Again, I didn't script this, I just really didn't want both Devilot and Miria here for some reason. Call it my autism, make fun of me if you must, but that's really a weird thing to make fun of a guy who has a sock puppet YouTube channel over. I wanted to include a Breath of Fire rep, because I'm always hearing about how that series is pretty beloved in Japan, and the lack of representation across the Versus series has stuck out to fans over the years. So similarly to how Jin from Cyberbots was our OG Literally Who rep in the first MvC, yet in all likelihood was probably seen as a pretty pedestrian pick to Japanese players, a Breath of Fire rep could bring that same energy again. Now, I'm not a Breath of Fire fan myself, but it's my understanding that the series swaps heroes around between entries to some extent. So I wanted to find a character who could potentially represent multiple entries. And when I looked up if the series had a recurring villain, I was presented with the OG trilogy's final boss, Miria, a goddess of destruction who takes on many monstrous forms, and even has a human disguise vessel that looks like an innocent little apron-wearing girl but with glowing red eyes. Does it get any more Japanese fighting game archetypey than that? And there we have it. A full base roster for a potential MvC4 that evenly balances those crucial 8 categories and introduces 10 to 12 newcomers evenly split between the two companies. If this roster were actually what we got for MvC4, I can imagine there being some disappointment for sure, but it'd almost certainly be eclipsed by fans' gratitude for both the sheer size of it and the effort to diversify the breadth of reference from both brands, right? Well, you tell me, I guess. But of course, we're not done here, are we? Though there may not be very many examples of new Capcom fighting games released these last 2 generations, of the ones that have come about, one thing's all but guaranteed. DLC will come. So as stated before, here come 3 lists for DLC passes that include 1 fighter from each of the 8 categories, no clones this time. 1 list for all newcomers, 1 list for all veterans, and 1 list for my most wanted newcomers. I considered doing a pass for my most wanted veterans too, but I was torn enough on the exclusion of my ideal newcomers on the base roster. Trying to bring a similar balance to my favorite veterans too, knowing that I've got a generic veterans pass to settle anyway, forget about it. I'm not even saying these DLC lists are indicative of what would or should happen, as much as I am just demonstrating how much potential there is for Marvel vs. Capcom DLC when it's not The Winter Soldier, wow, Black Widow, wow. Man, Infinite was a mess. Our Marvel veterans for this pass would include the famous face of Doctor Doom, the Cosmic Pick, Rocket Raccoon, the X-Men adversary Magneto, and my favorite character ever to be included in a Marvel vs. Capcom game, the WILDCARD, Blackheart, baby. You know, now that I think about it, if I swapped Rocket and Shimagoroth's places in the base roster and the DLC, this pass would be all villains. Food for thought. It's too late to change things now. I've freaking gotta lock this thing in. I've already made the graphics. Our Capcom veterans for this pass would include the famous face of Zero from Mega Man X, the contemporary star Phoenix Wright, the oldie but goodie Senko from Darkstalkers, and literally who now? That young lady who pilots the big robot whose status in this category is kinda questionable. Who are you thinking of right now? Tronbon or Saki Omakane from Quiz no Nero Dreams? Well, whichever one you're thinking of is the one it actually is, because frankly, I'm completely split on who makes more sense here. Saki's only ever been playable in Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, not Marvel, though she was an assist in Marvel 1, but so was Devilot, and we're calling her a newcomer, so Saki can't be a veteran, but is Tronbon really unknown enough to be considered a literally who? I don't think so, but I want her playable again, I'm keeping Tronbon on all future graphics of our roster here, but if you feel that including her in this category is a stretch, just tell yourself it's Saki, okay? And if you feel that including Saki in the Veterans Pass is wrong because she's as much a newcomer as Devilot, tell yourself it's Norimaro, okay? You happy now? Just look at this DLC pass here. Doesn't the inclusion of these veterans make this roster feel a little more complete? Numbers can be so restrictive, but if you swap any of these choices out for ones in the base roster, you run the risk of either skimping out on newcomers or replacing equally beloved vets. Roster balance. It's an art, my friends. Anywho, let's indulge a little now. More newcomers coming at ya. This ain't my personal most wanted, but one I can see pleasing a lot of people while also staying true to the 8 categories. Our Marvel newcomers include the famous face of the Green Goblin, the Cosmic Icon, the Silver Surfer, a blue X-Man shockingly missing from past MvC lineups, Dr. Hank McCoy, aka Beast.
To be fair, he is a pacifist.
Shut up!
And finally, the modern face of Marvel Wildcards, Squirrel Girl. Now, I feel the choices here are perfectly understandable, but some of you might be asking, why the Silver Surfer? Why not Star-Lord, or Drax, or Nebula? Well, it's like this, you see. I love the Silver Surfer. Oh my gosh, I love the Silver Surfer. He's amazing. It's some of the best writing and art of the Silver Age. Kirby is king, man. You go find Zenlaw Norinrad. Don't give up, man. To me, my board. Ah! But wait, you interrupt. If you love him so much, why isn't he in your personal list? Because, dear Queerier, in terms of personal most wanted Cosmic Marvel picks, there is another. But we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Now for the Capcom newcomers in this pass. We've got the famous face of Leon S. Kennedy from Resident Evil 4 specifically, baby. The contemporary star Sissel from the recently re-released cult classic deduction game Ghost Trick. The arcade star of yesteryear, Batsu, from the oft-acclaimed but sadly dormant Rival Schools, and a literally whose very existence tickles me to my core, Lin Kurosawa. This Capcom original Alien Hunter character was invented for the Alien vs. Predator beat-em-up arcade game, and despite being a Capcom original character, she's technically half-owned by Fox. But Capcom clearly had a fondness for the character, and not fully owning the rights to her, was denied permission to include her in the original Marvel vs. Capcom. But throughout the late 90s, Lin would find legally distinct ways of cameoing in Capcom games and lineups. My personal favorite being this artwork of a bunch of Capcom heroines in a cluster where only Lin's foot is visible. You know who owns the rights to use Lin Kurosawa? 20th Century Fox. You know who owns Fox? Disney. You know what else Disney owns? Marvel. Marvel and Capcom finally have the chance to officially bring Lin back in something, and my gosh, wouldn't it be amazing to finally get her in a vs. Capcom game? And bam! This roster's newcomer count goes up to 18. 20 if you count clones. And again, like I said about the Veterans Pass before, don't they just brighten up the roster that much more? And can you honestly say any of them should have taken the place of anyone on the base roster? I guess you can if you really want to. It's your right as much as it's my right to disagree. But now let's finally get to the main event, eh? Talking Socks, yours truly, most wanted new characters from each of these 8 categories. Starting with Marvel, the most famous face to not yet be included in an MvC game that I would love to see is Frank Castle, aka The Punisher. The Marvel Capcom arcade legacy starts with him, man. How has this not happened yet? Now, who's my most wanted cosmic pick above the Silver Surfer? Well, similar to Shuma-Gorath, this is a character who very much borders on, nay, straight up is spiritually, a wild card. A character who I was technically introduced to in the movie Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, but whose race I was introduced to in the pages of the Silver Surfer comics. That race being the Lem, and that character being Krugar. An alien sorcerer supreme with perhaps the greatest alien comic book hero design ever drawn. Isn't it beautiful? It's like Blackheart and Shuma-Gorath had a baby. I love you, Krugar. I'm sorry Marvel Studios made you conjure the crying laughing emoji in Guardians of the Galaxy 3. You deserve better. You deserve the world. You deserve your own comic, and I hope and pray you make your way into MvC someday, as you so rightly deserve to. My most wanted X-Man is probably your most wanted X-Man too. Nightcrawler. From a design standpoint, he's already stellar, and his teleportation powers, swashbuckling combat style, and acrobatic abilities make him absolutely perfect for a tag team fighter. But on something of a personal note, my first exposure to Nightcrawler was on the 90s animated show. And growing up as a little homeschooled middle-child Catholic boy who also felt his fair share of ostracization, his resilience and faith spoke to me on another level. And seeing Logan take his advice to heart and finding some peace at the end of that episode praying at the foot of the tabernacle, I cried. I cried when I wrote the script, and I've got to move on before I start crying as I read these lines. And now for my wild card. This character is possibly my favorite character in all of Marvel Comics, and it is a shame that this character also happens to be regularly misunderstood by the public, misunderstood by movie makers, and misunderstood by a lot of comic book writers too. But I digress. This character also happens to be the one I suggested might host the big crossover party in my previous MvC video. What does it have to do with Citrus? Well, Citrusville, Florida is a short drive away from the nexus of all realities. Located in a swamp, safeguarded by the creature to whom all who feel fear burn by his touch. A creature incapable of thought, yet is guided by instinct and empathy. A creature you don't actually know if you've only ever seen him in movies or the R.L. Stine series. The gargantuan and nigh indestructible creature that once was Dr. Theodore Salus. That character is Man-Thing. What more can I say? His design is great, his form is great, he'd make a great fighting game character. And if you're curious as to why I like him so much and want to appreciate him as much as I do, read Steve Gerber's run on this guy from the 70s. It's gripping stuff. Great mix of high concept yet down to earth, Marvel writing at its very best. But enough about Marvel. What about Capcom? When it comes to choosing a most wanted famous face from Capcom who hasn't been in an MvC game, that's damn near impossible. But I've reached a compromise. As you might have guessed from my previous MvC video, I'm a pretty big fan of Pocket Fighter. So how's this for an idea? Include a character on the roster called Pocket Fighters, composed of most if not all the characters from that game, and sorta like Bowser Jr. and the Koopalings in Smash, whatever color you choose is the one you play as. And their moves would have them transform into whichever character performing whichever move. Mix and match, go crazy, go nuts, I don't know, I think outside the box, sue me. Now remember earlier in this video when I said the Monster Hunter series would be better represented by a playable monster rather than hunter? Well, I have one such monster in mind for my contemporary pick. And it's Quetzalwacha, the bat monkey lemur sloth tamandua anteater of my dreams. You can point a finger at me for going with Flash over Substance all you want, but you best be pointing at the Capcom devs too, because how else do you explain Shuma-Gorath and Blackheart's inclusion in Marvel superheroes? Now then, for my classic arcade star pick, I'm a little torn. I think I can safely say I'd like to see a yet-to-appear in an MvC game Darkstalkers character, but who to choose? Lord Raptor? QB? Talbane? In the end, I have to go with my heart and pick my reliable main across all the games he's in, Sasquatch. Aw, look at him. Ain't he a doll? Now, finally, my final character choice, a literally who from Capcom. Well, you might view this as copping out, but my most wanted pick from this category is to ask, literally, who? Hey, so this segment was initially me making a case for why a totally unknown Capcom character, so much so that theoretically I couldn't possibly see it coming, would be ideal. But enough time has passed since I initially wrote and recorded this that my fascination with Capcom vs. roster building led me down several rabbit holes, to the point I made a 60 character 3v3 Capcom All-Stars roster, and what I'm basically saying here is, I don't think I want to be blindsided by a totally unknown pick anymore. I have specific ideas for specific obscure characters, and I want you to know what they are. So I guess look out for that video on the pure Capcom roster in the future at some point. I don't know. Maybe I'll stream it and put the highlights up on here. I don't know. As I've got work, I've got college, I've got stuff to do. I want to make videos like this, Nintendo IP videos. Life's tough, can't afford to do full time. So maybe support me on Patreon. I don't know, just a thought. I'm not going anywhere though. I'll be back. I'll be back. You can't get rid of me. You couldn't get rid of me if you wanted, if you tried. Take a look at this complete roster we've made. Isn't it beautiful? Doesn't it make you want to express gratitude to the person who compiled it and detailed every inclusion with deliberated commentary by leaving this video a like, subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, and even supporting the channel through Patreon or by becoming a channel member, both of whom, by the way, get access to these videos at least 24 hours ahead of the public and also get behind the scenes updates and are credited at the end of videos. Doesn't it? Doesn't it? Doesn't it? Doesn't it? No? Well, if this video gets at least 100,000 views or 1,000 new subs in the first 2 weeks, I'll make a video publicly flaying myself with a flaming wire for bothering to go to the effort. F me. I can't believe you made it all the way to the end of the video. Like past the Patreon credits and during this Endslate thing. That's so cool. Thank you. Go to bed. Night night. Love you.